Hi, welcome to another exciting episode of the Andre The Beast Crayton Show 2025. Damn, that number even sounds good. 2025. Started something new, a new season. The first guest of 2025. That's crazy. And not just any type of guest. A shaker, a builder, an influencer. Shit, the list goes on. In a new podcast. Let me tell you about this young lady. New York, Latino, and a resume as long as the Encyclopedia Britannica. When I was looking at all of the stuff that she's accomplished and things that she's doing, I'm like, it's crazy. Sometimes I was saying to myself, it's kind of unbelievable, especially when you see numbers that say $4 billion. I'm thinking, damn, I need to know who this person is personally when you're dealing with $4 billion. I don't even know what $4 billion looks like. But I always tell people this, and going into the new years, you need to understand something about money, about how you are perceived, about your communication skills, about your mindset, and how to navigate all that moving forward so people can understand what your brand is all about. Now, we hear the word for the last couple of years, coaching. We've been hearing coaching like crazy. And even as a producer, I hear that. And the first thing that comes out of my mouth is, what makes you different? Everybody's a coach. What makes you different? Why should I listen to you? And a lot of it is about stories. Okay, stories are cool. But today, a young lady is going to tell us exactly the blueprint of a coach and what that consists of and how she took all of her skill sets to take that coaching knowledge and bring it to the forefront to help other individuals. All the way from New York, like to welcome to the show, the beautiful Jessica Rivera. Let me pronounce the name right. Jessica Rivera. Did I get it right?
Rivera.
Boom.
Rivera. Boom. Yes. Hello. Thank you for having me.
Great. Welcome to the show. You know, I read your bio. $4 billion. Mm-hmm. Let's start there. No, before we do that, that's because I already told me where you at, where there's no grass. Tell a little bit about you first before we get started with your story.
Yeah. Born and raised in New York, and there is grass. There is grass here, just FYI. But born and raised in the concrete jungle, right? And and I really don't know anything different. Every time I tried to move when I was in corporate, they gave me more money to stay or another promotion. So I've been here my whole life. And I think there's so many benefits to growing up in a city like this, right? I was a New York inner city kid, rode the train many times for many, many years of my life. And there's parts of that really hardened me up in a great way, right? Mm-hmm. I was in sales. I was in business to business sales, and my clients were all men. Everybody in corporate was all men. I was really the only woman of color in my whole org, and almost always the only woman of color at the table. And so while I used to think that was something that worked against me, I finally realized toward the end of my corporate career that it was something that worked for me when I really leaned into it.
Hold that thought for a minute. You talked about, what's the Latino community like in New York? I don't know much about New York. I have some friends that are from there, and I mean, they live, die New York. I'm like, what is the catch here? Like, you're now in Cleveland, but you're rocking New York like it's the last planet on the earth. I mean, what's the connection with culture ties to New York? And you said you've been there. That's all you know. What is it that makes individuals from New York so determined to succeed?
Yeah. Well, it is a kind of like a dog eat dog kind of environment. But I'll say this, what I understood, what I didn't appreciate about the culture of New York, which I appreciated later in my life, because when I worked in corporate sales, we worked remotely. So I've been in a remote environment since like 2006.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would travel and meet a lot of different people, Latinos, Black, whatever, everywhere across the country. And I would always gravitate to somebody of color, right? Because that's me. And we were in a mainly white environment. And what I appreciated was that, see, I grew up in Brooklyn. And in Brooklyn at the time, it was like white, Black, Puerto Rican, and if you were some other Hispanic, you still said you were Puerto Rican back then. Now everybody's kind of repping wherever they come from, which is beautiful. But I mean, there will be photos of me as a child with everybody.
Right.
And so I think I didn't really appreciate that until I started meeting other people from other places and really understanding how some of these larger cities, like LA, they're still extremely segregated,
Mm-hmm.
which I really didn't appreciate when I was younger. I just felt that's all I knew, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in New York, it's like you're Haitian, you're repping Haiti. You're Puerto Rican, you're repping Puerto Rico. You're white, you're repping whatever you are. And so that was my thought process. It's like just be proud of who you are and then just love others as human beings. So it's a combination of the streets of New York as well as my household. And so I grew up in like the party house. My parents, who are still together over 50 years, loved everybody. The doors were open. Come in, let's party, let's hang out. It didn't matter what color you were, it didn't matter who you loved, just come in. They welcomed everybody. So I think it's that combination that really just has me falling in love with people and becoming a coach. And we can talk about that a little bit later.
You said something that is very rare to some extent. Your parents, Latino, have been together for over 50 years and are still together.
Yeah. Yeah.
My question here is, what did you learn from that? And what were some of their struggles that you had to witness, that kept them together for 50 years? Because you had 50 years, you had to see a lot and you had to learn a lot from both mother and father, as well as your siblings. What were some of those core values and some of those things that you was like, I can't believe this is happening. I don't want this to happen to me, that you had to explain to your father and mom, and they had to sit down and say, look, this is how life is. This is how you navigate this particular situation.
Well, I always say that when it comes to the parent pool, I won. I won when it comes to the parent pool. So I got very lucky. My parents that are not only still together, they still like each other. They still like each other. They laugh a lot. They have fun together. They still, they still have sex. So, and we know all of these things because they're pretty transparent. So I grew up in a household where every topic was on the table. It didn't matter what it was.
Right.
And so what I did witness was that they really rode for each other, right? And so when my parents first got together, my grandmother didn't really like my mother. And one day they made my grandmother, my aunt made her cry. And my father went back to his mother, which is like unheard of in like the Latino community. Like you're not talking like what mom says goes, right? Like the respect level. And he said, you are not treating my wife that way, and put his foot down.
Wow.
And so they really rode for each other. But I think what's embedded in especially a Latino community for Latinas, it's like we come last. So we take care of everybody. That's what it means to be a good person.
Right.
Everybody comes first, especially the men in our family.
But
that. Yes, 100%. I mean, the brothers, the uncles, everybody, the cousins, everybody comes first. But my household was a little bit more progressive. It had threads of that, but not as much as other households. And so my parents, my dad was a little bit of like a hippie in the 70s. So a little bit more of a progressive relationship that they had.
Mhm.
And so, but what I learned was that there's still struggles, meaning like they had their struggles, especially thinking about they had 4 children together. 3 of them were teenagers at the same time. That's not easy. Anyone who's raised a teenager knows that is not easy.
Were they all girls or boys and girls?
Boys and girls. Yeah. So
Okay.
it's my sister, myself, 2 boys.
Okay.
And my sister and I are like best friends, yin and yang for sure. But they really raised us, from my point of view, to say family first.
Right.
You can have all the friends in the world, but at the end of the day, your family is what matters.
Mm-hmm.
And also to just love people. And that's just, I've seen them go through ups and downs, definitely more ups than there were downs. But what I really learned for me personally, and I remember telling them this, well into my 30s, like, you guys made me think this was easy. They have such a beautiful relationship that I just thought love conquers all. Mm-hmm. And I stayed in relationships entirely too long, looking at theirs, thinking that it will work itself out.
What do you mean? What do you mean when you say that? Like, you stayed in relationships too long, hoping that the core values that you saw present in front of you was going to translate into the happily ever after. But with that, this is a 2-part question. Why did you gravitate to that relationship? When did you see the red flags? And you'd already said why you stayed there long enough. I understand, but go a little bit deeper with the 2 questions that I asked.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and one that my therapist and I probably still haven't figured out. But I'll say this. I'll say this. The red flags were there from the very beginning. I think when we are able to pay attention, when we truly are intact with our gut, the red flags are always there from day one. I mean, literally day one. And I chose not to acknowledge those red flags, right? A lot of it, when you think about it, is culture. Women should stay together. I was a little bit of a rebel. I had my first kid at 19 out of wedlock, which was unheard of in my family. I was the only woman at the time. And then when I met the person I was with longer, I wanted that relationship to work so badly. And I thought that my love for him would conquer all. But what my parents told me when I told them, like, you guys made me think this was real. You made me think this was easy. And they said, love does conquer all, but both have to be in it.
What do you mean when you say you was a rebel? What's a rebel in your eyesight? And how old were you when you was a rebel?
Yeah, I think early, like from probably as soon as I could be. My sister is like, she hates when I say this, but I'm like, she was the perfect child, right? She listened to the rules. She was very much like a little mom, like very first child. And, I was the one who didn't follow any of the rules, right? I was like, I followed wherever the fun was. And, I think that what's beautiful about the relationship I have with my sister is that she's a little too rigid, and I'm probably a little too like carefree. And so we would always she'll bring me back a little bit, and I'll push her forward a bit. And so it's been a nice, beautiful relationship over the years, as we've grown as people, as mothers, as sisters, and as daughters. So that's what we've learned. And I'll say I was always a little bit of a rebel, right? I was following the fun.
You wind up entering the workforce, Latino woman in a male dominated arena. What were the challenges that you had to deal with?
There were so many challenges, and if I'm being completely honest, I think a lot of them were made up by me in my mind.
Okay.
Not that they weren't true. Yes, they are true. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, even if I wasn't the youngest as far as number is concerned, I appeared young, right? I look younger than my age. I had a child. I was a young mom. I felt like, people are probably thinking like ghetto or I don't know. I had all of these ideas in my mind of what people were thinking. So I worked harder than everyone else. I did more than my counterparts. And that's how I ended up leading a $4 billion department, because and I had leaders that I did not feel were very supportive of me. So, okay, you don't want to be supportive? My numbers are going to show. My numbers, my work is going to speak for itself.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with that, which I know a lot of people, and I coach a lot of executives who, you're going to keep your head down and your work is going to speak for itself. But that is not the way life works. You
Mm-hmm.
have got to be able to advocate for yourself. And it took me a lot of like force and grinding and hustling. And in my mind, I loved the hustle, right? I liked that part, but it also felt like force. It also felt exhausting. It also felt like I couldn't be myself. And when I realized, hang on, this is too tiring. I had already checked off a lot of the boxes that I wanted to check off. I said, I need to just show up as me.
Mm. Well, you know what? Let's go back a minute with what you said. You said a lot of it was things that I had implanted in my head when I walked through the door. But go back to move forward. What you said, I don't think it was anything you that was in your head that didn't surface, because those things did surface, and those things made you become better because you was aware. First of all, you probably didn't think they was going to happen. So um um when we go in when we go into these workforces being minorities, I hate to say it, but those things do exist. How they present themselves may come in different forms, and we're able to conquer it. Like you, somewhat like you said, you knew how they was. Let me go back. Let me go back. Give me an example of when those things that you proceeded. I don't. They can be one or two, because no, that doesn't mean everything is going to come to light. But give me an example of when two of those things did come to light.
Yeah. So let me give you an example of where, so to your point, they do exist. I'm not saying that they don't, but I will say that we perpetuate it sometimes, right? So let me give you an example. So for example, if I'm walking into a room and I'm thinking, these people are thinking X. They're thinking, um, I'm not good enough to be in this room. They're thinking like, I don't know, whatever made up story I made up in my head. Some
Mhm.
of it may be true, some of it may not be true.
Right.
What I learned was that I may be walking into a room thinking, oh, I'm exhausted. Like, what am I going to say? Let me make sure I say this right. Let me say it. All of this mental acrobats that I'm doing in my mind. Meanwhile, they're thinking, wow, she's really killing it. Wow, she really handled that situation pretty good.
Mhm.
Or I'm thinking, I'm being extra nice, and they're thinking she's being too aggressive. So I think that I was way too much in my mind instead of asking questions and being curious as to what the possibilities are. And if I would have walked into the room like I do now, thinking, oh, I just want to show you love, right? In my head, I just want to tell me how great you are, tell me what's going on with you. That changes the entire mood
Mhm.
of the room, right? Instead of me thinking, having all this anxiety, I'm walking in with that anxiety. Even if on the outside, I'm like confident or people think whatever, that anxiety is still showing up with my energy.
Give me two examples. You had to have it.
Yeah, well, I'll give you an example of a boss that, like I said, I don't think I had leaders that really supported me.
Hmm.
And so one of them, she was a woman in a male dominated industry. She was white, or she is white. And she had this idea that she needed to show up just as tough as everybody else, right? She liked being a bitch. I heard you curse before, so we could curse on this show, right? I like
Yeah.
that. So she liked being a bitch. Um, and I was so done with the way she spoke to me. I couldn't take it anymore. And it wasn't only me, it wasn't a Jessica thing. She did it to everybody, but I could not take it anymore. So I said to her, I was rehearsing, how am I going to tell her? How am I going to tell her I didn't like the way she spoke to me? Finally, I have the courage. I tell her, hey, remember when you said XYZ? I really don't like the way that came out and whatever it was. And she was like, what? I'm concerned that you don't know when I'm joking. And I'm like, this bitch is crazy. Um, but in my mind, that's what I'm thinking, right? This bitch is crazy. Instead of me, in my mind, I could have handled that better, because when you can call people to the carpet in a way that's not aggressive and you're not meeting them where they are, you're just like, what do you mean by that?
Mm.
Tell me more, because I'm telling you how I'm feeling right now, and I don't feel like you're validating my feelings.
Hmm.
right? I didn't have the language. I was too busy in my mind thinking this bitch is crazy, right? My Brooklyn is coming out. And so I think things like that, when they would surface, when they would show up for me, like in my head, it would be like, she doesn't think I can handle this. She doesn't think that, now she thinks I'm stupid. That's how I would receive it. Now, the truth is, she has her own insecurities. She has her own garbage that she's coming to the table with. Now, one of us have to be the grown-up in the room. And I want to be that person that's more curious, that's more setting the tone for the conversation, that is more, when we're able to set the tone, we're also able to navigate that conversation the way we want it to go.
Yeah.
So those are the skills that I've built. But to your point, I needed those tough bosses. I needed these difficult situations for me to get me here. But like everything else we learn, I wish I would have learned that a lot sooner.
How did the environment change because even though you navigate with irregular personalities in the workforce, it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody's going to hear you.
Well, I understand that we may think that, but I kind of disagree. I think that when we build our communication skills to the point where, I think, okay, there will be a small minority. I think the majority will hear you though, because when we butt up against someone who is to the point closed off, right? Or defensive, or all of those things, and we approach it in a way that I'm here for you. I want you to tell me what's going on. I want you to be open and honest with me. And I'm going to be vulnerable with you. So I'm going to allow you to be vulnerable. I'm going to show you, I'm going to model what vulnerability means. I'm going to model and show you what curiosity means. I'm going to model and show you what really caring about you means, so that we can not live this dynamic that we've been living the whole time, right? Because many times when we're in a relationship, work or home, we end up living the same argument over and over again. We're living the same problem over and over again. So I want to model for you and for us, we need to get over this hump, babe. What do we need to do?
How did it change? What was the reaction?
My entire life changed.
Meaning with her, that lady.
Yeah. So with that lady specifically, she was one of the best teachers for me, because there was another incident that went really bad. And what I learned I'll tell you what I learned about me. So let me tell you the incident. So the incident, her and I had been working together on and off for, I don't know, 8 years or so. That's maybe a little bit longer. And it was, like I said, I traveled for work. And one day I missed a flight, which was completely unlike me. I used to like to get to the airport early and like check my emails and all of this thing. So I missed my flight and I'm like, oh my God, I do not want to hear her mouth. So I decided to lie. Again, not like me. I'm a terrible liar. So I tell her, something happened to the flight, whatever. So I get there and it's dinner time. Everybody's at this restaurant. And then we're all going back to the hotel. And she's like, can I talk to you really quick? I already knew she knew. So we're in the lobby of this hotel. Mind you, my counterparts are, who knows where they are in the lobby, because they may be at the bar, they may be, I don't know. She starts asking me, so what happened with the flight? And I said, okay, well, if I'm being honest, I lied. And I told her what happened. And she kept on berating me, and she kept on like digging, and she kept on, to the point where I was so upset, I started crying in the middle of this hotel room. And me and my Latina background, and you have to respect, and I did not move. I'm like, why the hell didn't I just get up? And so I can't, but I did say to her, I can't do this right now. Like, she sees me crying. I'm telling her I can't do this. And I admitted to you I lied. What else do you want from me? I said those words, but I wouldn't leave. I go upstairs to my hotel room and I am livid. I am so angry at myself for allowing myself to sit there. And of course, we call my sister, and I'm like, can you believe what this bitch just did? And me, like an idiot, I just stayed there. That was a turning point for me, because what happened right after that was that we were all there. The leaders were all in town to do a training. We were being trained to do a training to our staff. And it was about leadership. And they actually gave an example on when an employee says they can't do this right now, you have got to let them go. And and I was like, and they spoke about when there's this angst in the leader employee relationship, the employee can start doing things that are out of character. I was like, oh my God, this is me. You're talking about me. But then I started asking myself, how are these traits that because she's been my leader for some time, how am I doing this to my staff?
Oh,
And
wow.
when I started thinking about how can I be of service, and I decided in that moment, I did not want to be like her because I know that we did share some traits because she was about her business. She was very good at her job. In that way, she was terrible with people, but good at her job.
Mm-hmm.
And there were things that I respected about her. So I started asking myself, where am I showing up like that for my people? And that day I decided I'm going to become a better leader for them. And I ended up just becoming a better person.
Yeah. And that's funny that you said that. And I'm pretty sure you've been in the field long enough to see multiple personalities. I remember having surgery. I won't mention the doctor's name. She was like number one in her field, and her people skills sucked. And I just thought
Terrible.
it was like me, but it was like, and I really felt sorry for her at the end of the day. And the reason I said that was the only way people recognized you or said anything about you, it was one line. She's a good surgeon, but she's not people oriented. So I remember going to her office to do the follow up after you have surgery. And I'm more like Jason Bourne. When I walk into the environment, I'm going to assess certain things in there, especially knowing that I've already got the feedback that you're not a people person. So I saw a bunch of horses, pictures and stuff. So I opened up the conversation about, oh, well, you got horses, and start talking about the horses. And I noticed she started to come out of that thing. But
Mhm.
back to this question is, I see this often with people. You had to see it often. You change with that. So my question here is, how important is it to recognize that you can be good in your business field, but you got to be just as good with relating across the board to people? Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, I mean, that is how we grow anything. Anything you want to do in life requires people,
Mm-hmm.
period.
Yeah.
Period. You want to grow your business, it requires people. You want to get a promotion, it requires people. You want to do anything. What you did in seeing those horses, that's a sales tactic. How can I find common ground? Right? Or we were doing $1 million acquisitions. So yeah, we have to find some common ground. But the easiest way, so we need people.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about I can make all the money in the world, if you have nobody to share it with, what a sad life. And many of us can relate to people who have money but seem miserable.
I see it
And when you
all
think
the
of,
time. Yeah.
I'm sure you do. I do too.
Yeah.
But you can, and that's why, by the way, that's why I don't look at the news anymore, right? Because, okay, so we grew up, four of us in the house, my parents, we kind of lived on love, right? Where there was so much love in our household. And so when people say, oh, this person got shot at the corner, nobody talks about all those homes on that block and
Mhm.
the amazing love that may be in there. We don't know.
Right.
We don't know about the person taking care of the grandma down the street, the grandma taking care of the neighbor's kids. We don't know anything about that, right? We just know like the bad thing. So I don't even look at the news anymore. But my point is that when you think about relationships, that's where joy comes from. That's
Right.
where real um, wealth comes from. If you have nobody to share it with, it's not as much fun.
How how much of a demand, how much pressure do you feel is is placed on the Latino culture based on the way the world is evolving now, when race identity is still being classified and hasn't changed the narrative? You being a female Latino American, how much pressure do you feel daily? And on top of that, what what is the most important part of that for you?
Yeah.
To change.
The change is so important. And I think that when I look at, I have a more progressive stance, living in New York, probably. But I think it's so important. What I really believe about Latinas is that we have got to understand, women in general, but especially Latinas, that we are important first. And we have got to serve. I have no problem with service. I love service. Like, I love giving, but I have to give from my saucer, not from my cup. And so you have to understand how do you push back? How do you know what you want? Do you even know what you want? And then once you know what you want, how do you ask for what you want?
Mm.
How do you make sure you're taken care of first? Because we grew up in a culture that we're last. We're last. Everybody else comes first, especially the men. And I have two sons. I love them to death, and but I even teach them, we have to take care of ourselves first and stop depending on somebody else to be responsible for my feelings.
Mm.
I have to be responsible for me. I have to be responsible for my happiness. Don't you love being around a happy person?
All the time. Yeah. Well, I start with
We
myself
love
first.
it,
Yeah, I think I start with
right?
myself first because I'm like, somebody said, "Well, why are you always smiling?" I'm like, if I can't smile at myself, then why am I going to sit around and wait on you to smile back at me? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that when we can learn that, okay, what does filling our cup mean? It does not mean getting your nails and hair done. It means real work. It
Mm.
means really working on you, really speaking your voice, speaking your truth, understanding what you want and what you need and asking for it. And so, we get taught, speak when spoken to, right? As
Mhm.
kids
Yeah.
in our culture. And we get taught to also respect, which is like, don't say how you feel. You can't speak bad about anyone else. If you speak bad about someone you love, then you don't love them. You can't call people to the carpet. You can't let them know you did something wrong and you hurt me. How do we fix that? Right? So I think for Latinas specifically, we have to find our voice.
You have two sons that are grown.
Hmm. Yeah.
You're a female. Um, you're divorced currently, correct?
Yeah, not in a relationship. Hmm.
With two Latino men as a single mom raising them.
Yeah.
What are the challenges what are the fears that you had to endure teaching boys to become men? And I'm not saying I'm pretty sure their father was there. I don't want to give the wrong impression, but being a single mom at the time, raising these young men in conjunction with their father, but we just talking about you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
What was the things you was mostly concerned about, and what are some of the things you're still worried about in the Latino community? Not with just men, even though you guys put men on that culture
yeah.
pedestal, but
Yeah.
men in the women, knowing what you had to go through.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, listen, there's so much I wish I would have known as a young mother that I know now. But my concern, there were some concerns like, are they going to lose the culture because we didn't live in a Latino neighborhood? But also, you're different. You're different than the rest of your friends, right? When we lived in a suburb, we live in a suburb of New York, and if they were messing around, not like, you can't go in the schoolyards after a certain time, and if they were in there and the cops came, if they catch you, it's a problem.
Right.
A lot of these uh, people in the neighborhood were connected to law enforcement,
Mm.
and so I would have to explain things to them to the point where they didn't understand where I was coming from.
Mm.
Right? They thought I was the crazy one. And one day, um, they got a taste of it themselves. And they were like, oh, okay, maybe you're right.
Mm.
And one day, this is my youngest, I don't remember how old he was, maybe call it 7 years old. And I was like, oh, go ask that man if you want if he wants you to shovel for him. And he wouldn't even acknowledge him.
Wow.
And one of my neighbors, actually, when again, my son was younger, my youngest is half Black and half Puerto Rican. And so he looks, he has like tan skin. And his friend was white Irish. And my neighbor would not acknowledge him at all. Older,
Wow.
veteran, would not speak to him at all. And so they had to learn firsthand what I was talking about. Now, I will say specifically after the George Floyd thing, now my youngest, 6'3", 200 and something pounds, big kid. When he got pulled over in one of these neighborhoods here, and about 4 cop cars came for a stop sign, like nothing. Like he rolled through a stop sign. 4 cop cars. He called me and we went running over there. Things like that would make me very nervous and very afraid.
Mm-hmm.
But I think now, as they've gotten older and kind of they are more aware of their surroundings. They are more cautious. They are more careful. I'm feeling calmer. I'm feeling cautious. I'm feeling less scared, and I'm feeling like, okay, they could handle these situations.
What do you tell the young Latino females that may feel like, I don't know the culture, so forgive me if I don't understand it, but I take it that the ideal is be married, take care of your husband, try to be a housewife and not so much a career-oriented woman. Are there fears when you're a Latino woman that there may not be opportunities for you once you decide to go out into the world, and sticking with traditions like that become a hindrance to Latino women because I don't hear much, and I know I've been blessed to meet some outstanding Latino women, some shakers in this world that I had no idea even exists. Whether it's because they don't have the ability to market, or they don't know how to market, or the society doesn't market them correctly, but it's only this much that I hear. So my question to you is this becoming a handicap for the Latino women community to venture out for fear of not being able to navigate in this world that we live in?
So it's interesting. If you look at the stats, Latinos have been the largest growing population since I can remember, and we still are. Yet, when you look at executives, when you look at government, when you look at Fortune 500, the numbers are minuscule.
Right.
And so, to your point, where's the disparity? Why is that happening? And I do think it has to do with marketing. Could be part of it, right? When you think about, it's either Black or white, right? And we kind of and obviously, listen, I love my Black sisters, and I think it's amazing the work that they are doing. To me, like, they are killing it. And so it seems though they are all kind of singing from the same song sheet, and we have to get on that same page as well. Okay. And how do we make sure that we lift up all? And how do we make sure that we also have our voices heard? Now, if you choose to go to college, be a stay-at-home mom, and raise your kids, beautiful, wonderful. I love that. I love that for you. You like it, I love it. No problem. But for the women who want to be heard and really climb that corporate ladder or be in government at the highest level, or I think it's time that you start really understanding how to speak up for yourself. And I will give you an example. So I was working with an executive who, her company wanted to give her opportunities. They offered her opportunities. They wanted her to step up, and she did not want to do it because she felt like her kids were too young.
Okay.
Now, were they too young? Were they not too young? Could she have done it anyway? I don't know. Who knows? But there is that thought process of it's either or. And it might be, maybe, but she wouldn't even explore it until now, after going to several events. A light sparked in her, and she said, okay, maybe my kids are old enough.
Mm.
And so I think that it is an individual decision. But what I don't want is for women, especially Latinas, to continue to hold themselves back because of the thought process of what being a good mom should be,
Mm.
according to whose standard, I don't know, right? Our old school standards.
Mhm. I'm gonna ask this question before we get into wrapping up about what you're currently doing. You mentioned you didn't grow up in the Latino community. You grew up on a different side. Was that a
Well,
handicap for you?
no. So I grew up in a multicultural community,
Okay.
right? It's not that there weren't, yeah, there were plenty of Latinos, but there were also plenty of Black folk on the block. There were plenty of white
Okay.
folk on the block. There
Okay.
was like if it to me, it felt like, and listen, it may have been only my block, right? I don't know. You live in this little tiny radius when you're a child, but
Yeah.
for me, it felt like a mixture of everybody.
Okay. I must have misunderstood the question. I thought you said that you grew up here and not in the Latino community. Okay. I'm sorry for that misunderstanding.
Yeah, no, there was a little bit of everybody there.
Okay. So my question is, you you've been a victim of a system. You've overcome some of the things in the system, should we say the journey that made you stronger and more knowledgeable. With that
Yeah.
said, you started your own venture to help bring awareness to these different areas, especially when you're dealing with $4 billion. I didn't even ask this. I got to ask this first. What were you doing for with these companies for $4 billion?
Yeah, so we would do acquisitions, and so I had a sales team. So my whole department brought in $4 billion year over year, and our clients were dealerships, and so we would do multi-million acquisitions, and then also we would be the loan provider. So there would be a lot of different ways, but yeah, it ended up being $4 billion. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Month over month. And so that's where the coaching comes in, right? Because I wanted to be less frustrated. I wanted to become a better leader, as I said, but I also wanted to be frustrated. When you're managing people, many people describe it as like babysitting. I didn't
Yeah.
want to feel like that about my people. Many people describe it as like, I remember this one leader told me, oh, it's kind of like, you love the congregation, but you can't stand no, you love the church, but you can't stand the congregation. I didn't want to feel like that about my people.
Yeah. So
I
so
thought that was, yeah,
so now you're coaching, and we talked about this during the pre-interview. Everybody's coaching. And it
yeah,
just gets to the point to where you'd be like, this is what I do, really. Yeah. And I'm not
yeah,
knocking it. I get it.
yeah,
I get it.
yeah,
But what are you specializing when you say coaching? So I'm not even gonna call you a coach. You're a specialist in advancement opportunity. That's what I'm gonna call it going into 2025. Man, I don't know where
yeah.
that came from, but it sounded good as hell.
It sounded great. It sounded great.
So
Um,
what are you doing? What you taking all this experience and put it into a package? Tell me what you're doing to help people to navigate and have a better life.
yeah. When it comes to really packaging it up and being able to service individuals, I really like to look at it in three pillars: the power of our words, the way in which we communicate; the power of our presence, our executive presence, our leadership presence. Doesn't mean you're leading people, but you still have to lead yourself, right?
Mhm.
And then the power of our influence. How do we create belonging organizations? But when I say an organization, if it's just you, let's think of you as an organization. How do you make sure every single person that comes around you feels like they belong, feels like they can be themselves, feels like, they feel respected and they can respect you?
Mhm.
So how do we create that? I feel like when we stop looking at, oh, that person and that person, they did this and they did that, and they made me feel this way. And if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have said that. When we stop doing that and say, wait a second, my words have power. My presence is a present. And I can make the decision on how others feel when they're around me. I want you to feel great. I want you to feel like you could be you. And my words are going to uplift you in that way. And if you can't reciprocate that, Perfect. I release you. It could be that simple. And now, when you're in a work environment, choosing the right questions and calling people to the carpet in a way that is not going to have them defensive, but it'll have them thinking. I'm going to force you to think about what you say when you talk to me.
That sounds beautiful. Let's call it what it is. It sounds beautiful. But let's get
Mm-hmm.
real. We live in a fear-based society, no matter how we look at it.
Yes, we do.
If you are a minority, you're way more subdued to having a fear-based mindset.
Yes.
So how do you convince somebody?
Mm-hmm.
Let me rephrase it. How difficult was it for you to transition? Because you didn't come in with a fear mindset. So
No, I didn't.
you had what is called an upper hand. What about the individuals that don't have the upper hand, that come from poverty, that never got that don't have communication skills, that's it's survival state of mind?
Well, let's back up because I I had a benefit that I grew up with parents who were very loving,
Right.
right, to myself and to others. So I witnessed that. But I wouldn't say I did not grow up with an abundance mindset. I grew up with a prepare for the worst, hope for the best,
Okay.
right? So that already puts you in a negative. I grew up now, sometimes our fear gets us further, right? Because it's like, I'm afraid that I'm not going to be able to make that money. So I'm going to work harder. I'm afraid. Da, 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 da. So that was kind of like, that was where my hustle came in.
Mm-hmm.
And we grew up, in a lower middle class or lower, like my parents, when we were kids, they were on welfare. And then they finally saved a bunch of money and bought their first home back in the 80s, right? So we had our own, but we always had a lot of love. So I'll say that, right? I think I did win that pool. And so when I started realizing, I think again, and I was called a cynical, I was called aggressive, I was called crass. Trust me, this was not always the case. Not only when you think about my communication skills, they were trash. I wouldn't even public speak ever. I wouldn't even give a toast at a family function. And when I would get upset, either you were going to catch my wrath or I was going to shut down.
Okay.
So fast forward, I didn't like that about me. I didn't want, the goal was to be a better leader and to be less frustrated. Those are my two goals. How do I be less frustrated and how do I become a better leader? And in also, I would get so enraged that I remember, and this is where also a tipping point was, I was so upset, like I threw something, like I just banged it down on the floor and it bounced and it crashed into my oven and it just shattered the oven door. So that cost me some money. Then the next thing I broke was my washing machine, which cost me another couple $100s. I was like, okay, this is
You
hitting my
sure?
pockets.
Hey, you sure that's not anger management?
Yeah. So it was all of the above. And so, this was a work in progress. And all of that was happening while I was still being successful in my career because I was in
Right.
that hustle mode. I was grinding it out. I was like, I was chasing the bag. And so I I never try to convince anyone of anything.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to bring you to my side. But if we're working together, it's because you want to fix something.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to give you some tools and things to try, and you tell me how you feel. You tell me how it worked out. So I don't have to convince you. I'm going to give you some small little tips to use. And when you start seeing your environment change, that's when everything starts changing. That's when they buy in. It's like, oh, yeah, that conversation was a million times better by me just changing a couple of different words.
What do you think before we wrap up? And let me say thank you for taking time out to come and share your story and to educate individuals and give them the opportunity to at least take another step forward in their career and their life and the choices that they make. Um, what do you think are some of the handicaps that people face that prevents them from seeing the bigger picture like you just said?
Hmm. Hmm. I mean, it does all go back to our mindset. And this spiritual leader called Eckhart Tolle says everybody wants peace right up until somebody bothers them. Then we no longer want peace. Then we're ready to fight. And it's true, right? I was explaining this to somebody one day, and he's like, "Yeah, but what do I do when somebody cuts me off, or what do I do when somebody does this, or what do I do when somebody else does that?" And it's like, okay, if we're going to choose peace, and the other thing is, I don't believe in choosing peace and just suppressing our feelings. That I don't believe in, because that's like that toxic positivity. I don't believe in that either. What I do believe is me understanding, where is this really coming from? Because I cannot, if I'm that enraged over a comment, over somebody cutting me off, over something so trivial, there's a deeper issue here. So I made a decision for me. I was going to question all of my beliefs, all of my thoughts, so that I can get to the root of what's really going on with me. What's my real problem? What's the real issue here? If I'm thinking this way, if I'm pissed off that you said that, what am the second I start asking myself the question, I'm not mad anymore. I'm like, okay, wait, what's really going on here? What am I really upset about?
Yeah.
What's the bigger problem? Now I'm not angry anymore. Now I'm in curiosity. I'm like, yeah, what is the bigger problem?
Yeah. Sometimes it's good to ask yourself questions, and as crazy as this may seem, answer them. Answer
We
them.
are not our thoughts. We
Yeah.
are not our thoughts. And so, you know how sometimes like you're thinking and it's like you're having a whole conversation with yourself in your mind?
I do that often.
Right, exactly. Like you're having a company meeting.
Yeah.
Right. So you could literally say stop thought and organize your own thoughts and say, wait a second, that old thought, that old criticism, that judge that lives inside of our head, you can minimize him by questioning all of those things he's telling you that or she is telling you that you're not.
Mm,
So,
totally.
I mean, we could be here for a whole other hour.
Oh, yeah. Plus, I want people to call anyway, because this is your service. This is what you teach, and I think it's really good to let people know that you can be and do whatever you want to do. It's really shifting that mindset. You got a podcast. Tell us a little bit about the podcast and how people can subscribe, like, and follow. What's the podcast about?
Yeah, the podcast is called Success Unscripted. And well, number one, it's been my life. So that's it, right? I never finished college. And so there's been so many twists and turns, and we live so many different lives in this life. And so I love to hear about people, and I love to hear their stories, because to your point, it could really encourage someone else and be like, oh, wait a second. I remember somebody said to me, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't be as educated as you." I'm like, "As educated as me? You have way more education than I do."
Right, right,
Like,
right.
I come from the school of street knocks. But anywho, really allowing people to tell their story. I mean, I know so many great individuals that have unconventional stories, and I want everybody to see that success truly is unscripted, and it's whatever you define it to be. And so, but I also love real tools, real tactics. It's not only inspiration and motivation. We're talking education and transformation. So it's all of the above. So excited. So I just launched it this year, so super excited about it.
And how can the viewers find it,
Oh,
subscribe, like, and
yeah.
how can they reach out to you if they want to know more about your coaching as well as the podcast?
Yeah, so the podcast is on YouTube, on Spotify, Apple, everywhere you can find your podcast. You can listen to it there. And then I'm at Instagram at Coach Jessica Rivera. I go live. I'm on there all of the time. And I'm also on LinkedIn at Jessica Rivera as well. Those are the two places I typically hang out.
Jessica, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you subscribe, like, share, and follow. Like I said last season, all it takes is one click of the button to make a new friend, and that new friend can make a difference. You're only as strong as your weakest link. So start attaching your link to strong individuals to make a difference in your life. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another exciting episode of the Andre the Beast Crayton show.